Hey everyone, Margarita here. What I'm going to film about now is my first near-death experience, which happened when I gave birth from suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. So in order to better understand all of that, it's probably easier to watch the first two episodes of the labor and delivery, they're in two spots on my channel. So one spot is under my severe carbon monoxide poisoning left untreated, and it's part 1 and part 2. And it's also under the Detroit human trafficking at the hospitals section, under that section as well. So those two videos would need to be watched first to better understand what happened, what I'm about to talk about now, because that was my first near-death experience. Now, I had been in labor for about 11 hours or so at this point. I had left the place that had the carbon monoxide, went into labor shortly after, and then arrived at the hospital about 9 or 10 hours later. Then I stayed in an extreme state of distress, physical distress, for a very long time. My whole body was swollen all over. I could not walk. I couldn't move. I couldn't get anywhere. I couldn't do anything. I was supposed to have a water birth. They kept denying me the tub of water, and they kept making up different excuses as to why. And it got to a point where no one was helping me. They were only trying to do things against my wishes, and that was it. No one was trying to help at all. And at this point, I had been screaming. So this went on for about 3 to 4 hours because the baby was born at 3:40 p.m. It was probably between 11 a.m. and noon around the time it had gotten extremely distressful, to the point where I began screaming because I was suffering from severe carbon monoxide poisoning, and my hemoglobin was 7.2. So if you're deprived of oxygen to that severely, to that degree, it creates pain in every joint, every muscle, in every area of your body. So I was stuck in a state like that with no oxygen. They intentionally did not give me oxygen. At one point, the lady gave me 2 breaths separately, not even in the same sitting. She gave me one large breath and then one a little bit further down the line. And they were doing this intentionally. So if you watch the Detroit human trafficking in the hospital's label of my videos, if you watch, there's 4 videos on there. So if you watch all of those, you'll understand why all of this went on to this degree. So that went on like that for 3 to 4 hours, extreme physical distress, screaming at the top of my lungs. I had no oxygen to the brain. I was losing communication skills. It got to the point where I couldn't really communicate, but I could spit out a word or two here or there. All I could do was scream because I was in so much physical pain. So if you're deprived of oxygen to that degree, that's what you're gonna feel like. So not only was I in labor and delivery, but I'm also suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning to an extreme degree. Now, when you have a hemoglobin of 7.2, that's how the oxygen gets carried through your blood into your body and your brain is the organ that takes the most oxygen. So that's why women are generally given oxygen during labor and delivery if they have a lower hemoglobin, so that way the mother doesn't get damaged and the baby doesn't get damaged. So they didn't give that to me. Knowing that, they created an extremely distressful situation. And you know, if the mother's deprived of oxygen and her brain's deprived of oxygen, so is the baby's. And so I was stuck in this very extreme state for it was a good 3 to 4 hours. But I could do nothing but scream because I was in so much extreme pain. Not only that, I didn't have an epidural, I didn't have any drugs. So I'm here totally with nothing. I'm here with nothing, screaming to death, knowing I'm losing communication skills, but can't even communicate that. And then my brain became pressed against my skull, and I was extremely deprived of oxygen, and I could not communicate that. Once I had the first breath of oxygen, I knew I was deprived of oxygen, and that's why I asked for the second breath, and then I asked for a third, and she told me no. So, I mean, when you watch the other videos, you'll understand all of this and why. But that was the answer. That's what was creating the problem. I knew I was near death. I knew I wasn't going to make it much longer. This had gone on in such an extreme state for so long. I was completely depleted of all energy, all oxygen to the brain, all oxygen to all organs at this point. The baby's being deprived of oxygen. And I could not communicate any of this properly. I did scream that I needed a C-section, and they also said no. And now that I know what I know, and now that I have the blood work, because I didn't order the blood work for about 2.5 years, I figured it all out backwards after I was severely overloaded with the carbon monoxide. I knew I knew that the baby had a brain injury and I had a brain injury during the labor and delivery. So upon receiving those records, that's how I found out how low my hemoglobin was. That's how I figured everything out backwards. But there wasn't enough blood for a C-section is what it was. And they weren't going to say that. They didn't try saying anything at any given time that anything was wrong. They were trying to cover it up all along. From the time I had stepped foot in the building into the hospital, they knew something was wrong, just did not say anything. So they let it go on, get to that extreme degree all that time, and then I stayed in extreme distress all the way into the point where I was having this brain injury for hours at this point and screaming, knowing it got to the point where I knew I couldn't do anymore and I was going to die. That was going to be my last breath. I knew I wasn't going to be able to hold on any longer. I hadn't been able to use my phone pretty much since I had arrived. So there was no, like, even though my ex was standing there, but I don't even know where he was, if he was in the room or not, but he probably smoked an entire pack of cigarettes during all this. So I don't even, because I was facing the wall on my knees, I don't know if he had my hands and knees, because I couldn't stand, I couldn't sit, I couldn't lay, I couldn't do anything. I was so uncomfortable because they deprived me of oxygen and water, the two most simplest things on the planet, especially when somebody's doesn't have any pain intervention. That's very extreme. So I don't know where he was exactly, if he was in the room or not, but I knew I wasn't going to make it, and I couldn't communicate any further, and no one was trying to help me. So there was a room of about 15 people doing nothing but staring at me, basically standing there waiting for me to die. No one had any intention of helping me. But when I got to the point where I could not communicate any further and I couldn't take it any longer and I knew I was going to die, I started screaming to God. There was a nurse who came running from I don't know where. She was not in there prior. She started kicking people out of the room. And as soon as she came in, she seemed to have known exactly what I needed. She had put her hands on my lower back where it was jammed. And I do have scoliosis, a history of it for many years, decades. And that's why I have a chiropractor that I've been seeing since the 1990s. And so that's where it was jammed at. And it was because they didn't give me the tub of water to relax that spot in my back. It was that simple. It did not need to ever go on in this manner. And she did a human energy transfer type thing. She knew my back needed to be pushed on. Even though I couldn't communicate, she knew that. And she put her hands on my back, and maintained an energy transfer and transferred me enough energy to push the baby out. I knew that was my last breath. I knew I wasn't going to be able to hold. I knew I had a couple breaths left. That was it. That was literally about to be my last breath, and I was going to die, and I knew it. So as soon as she did that, it gave me enough stamina to get the second breath, because I knew, because the baby's head and shoulders all came out as soon as she did that, all in one breath, all my last breath, all in one push. So I knew it was going to be less than that to finish getting the baby out, and it was only one more push. So she maintained the energy transfer, and it stayed that way, and I did get the baby out. However, I was in such extreme distress from lack of oxygen to the brain, this going on for so many hours, that as soon as that happened, I was in such an extreme state that I went to such an other extreme state on the exact opposite end of relief, that the blood was just trapped in my brain. It wasn't flowing properly at all, and it's as if it was being blocked by all of this. And all of a sudden, I can't even explain what happened, but I couldn't communicate. I couldn't hear what anybody was saying. They were talking, they were asking me things. I think I even answered. I don't even know what I was saying, but I couldn't say what I was trying to say, because I kept trying to say, I don't feel good, like I think I'm gonna pass out, I think I'm gonna die. I kept trying to get those words out of my mouth, and no words would come out. So, and they were all working at a rapid pace and kind of rushing around, and they were saying this and that, and some of them were screaming really loud, and it's like they knew that I wasn't getting any oxygen to the brain, and I couldn't hear properly, so they were yelling, some of them. And I couldn't hear, because it's like I was down a long hallway at a distance is what it felt like, due to the extreme degree of relief from being in that extreme state, and then the oxygen coming back to your brain. That's what happened, and that's what it felt like, and that's what was going on. So all of a sudden, all of these people were in the room, rushing around. They all ran out the door. the nurse who saved me put the baby on me, and I kept trying to say, no, wait, don't, because I knew I was going to pass out. I knew I was still near death. I knew I was not far from dying, and I didn't know what was wrong, and they didn't know what was wrong, and they weren't trying to assess what was wrong either. But now this nurse who had came in during all this, she wasn't there previously, so she didn't see or know anything really leading up to that moment. But she had put the baby on me, ran out the room, and then it was just me and my ex standing there, or he was standing there, I was laying in the bed or sitting up in the bed with the baby, and then I had told him, I said, scoot closer, I think I'm going to drop the baby. And I don't think he understood what I was trying to say because I couldn't communicate properly, but what I was trying to say is I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to live, the baby's going to hit the floor, I'm going to fall out and the baby's going to hit the floor is basically what's about to happen. And he wasn't comprehending that, and he kept going outside and smoking cigarettes that, like he wasn't paying any attention to the reality of the situation and what had actually just happened, that he was like in his own little world. So I mean, I just held the baby, and then eventually that nurse did pop her head back in a couple times, and then I did eventually take a shower, and I know she checked on me after that because she knew something was wrong, and then I never seen her again after that. I do remember asking her name because the baby didn't have a name yet, and it was something versatile. I don't remember what it was. It's not in any of the paperwork, and then her name was on a hospital badge in the background of a picture, and the name part was cut off. So she really truly was an angel, and I don't have any other explanation for it because had she not arrived in that moment at that exact second, I knew I was going to die. I didn't know if the baby was going to make it or not, but I knew I wasn't going to make it, and she was put there for us that day for us. And now that I know what I know, and now that all these years have gone by, because now it's been 9 years, I do believe she was an earth angel. She was one of the 144,000 chosen ones, which is the same as I, and that's where she came from. She just dropped down outside the door right at the right time that day and time. And then I switched rooms shortly after, so I never seen her again. Still can't remember her name for the life of me, and I don't know if I ever will find her or if she's even going to ever see these videos or come forward, but that's who she was. That's where she came from. That's how we magically survived at the last second. Now going forward, we both had a brain injury. Immediately the baby was choking after that, which was a significant sign of a brain injury, and he remained in that state for the first 3 years of his life until he had his first hyperbaric oxygen treatment. So we did both have brain injuries. However, the entire hospital had covered it up, and they had other intentions. So if you view the other videos, you'll understand why, and it all makes sense now. But it did take some time to piece all of this together because I was in such an extreme state, and I was in fight or flight mode shortly after this, and trying to get us out of there, that none of what had happened was really clicking. I just knew we were in danger and something was wrong and we had to leave. So that's what I stayed focused on, and my life was pretty chaotic the several months following this because I stayed so unwell and so sick and injured from the brain injury from having the baby like that, that I never returned to normal from that day. So I walked into the hospital, had a baby, and never came out the same again. I never returned to normal from that day. And that was due to their actions. So if you view the other videos, you'll understand all of that. That was the first near-death experience. It was due to the carbon monoxide. The hospital did play a role because if we had been given oxygen, the end result, it would have changed our lives. I would have never returned to the source of the poisoning. We both wouldn't have had brain injuries. It would have changed the outcome. We would have never needed treatment, or at least not to the degree that we did end up needing treatment. And where we are today, none of that would have ever happened. So the first error was right here at Hutzel Women's Hospital in Detroit, Michigan. That was the first problem right there. So going forward, I did have a brain injury. So did the baby. We lived in pretty extreme distress for a while. And if you want to view what happens after all that, it's on the following videos under the carbon monoxide poisoning left untreated. It picks up with episode 3 after the labor and delivery and getting home. So if you want to know what happens after that, you can view those videos in that order. And I'm going to talk about the second near-death experience, which happens about 22 months after this. And the reason it even occurred in the first place is because this initial incident was left untreated, and we were not given oxygen. Otherwise, I would have never returned to the source of the poisoning 7 months later. and that's what caused the second near-death experience and brain injury. And I actually did die in the second one. So I'm going to come back and talk about that. You can view the videos in order. It'll make more sense if you view them in order. There's 5 intro videos, and then prior to watching this one, you would want to watch part 1 and 2 of Surviving Severe Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Untreated. And if you want to view further and know further information, then you could just keep viewing them in order. Now, I do have a GoFundMe at this point because of everything that has gone on. So if you watch all the other videos, you'll understand why everything is to the degree it is today. That's in the description box below. And like, share, subscribe, and I'll be back with another one. Thanks.